There are more myths about everyone's favorite Chicago gangster than you can even imagine. We picked a few that might surprise you.
Let's dig into this.
The story goes like this. Capone received his famous facial scars while fighting in World War I.
Capone hated his famous scars and found them so embarrassing that he tried to hide them when photographers were around. But veterans returning from World War I, coming home with war wounds, seemed to give him an idea.
Capone said that he had fought with the famous Lost Battalion in World War I. This force of about 500 men became trapped behind enemy lines in the Argonne Forest in France in 1918. Holding the line and fighting for days before being rescued, only 194 men walked out of the forest unscathed. The rest were missing, killed, captured, or wounded.
The Lost Battalion became famous for their bravery, and Al Capone told anyone who dared to ask about his scars that he was part of it. But despite registering for the draft, Capone was never in the army and never fought overseas. And the true story of Capone's scars didn't make him look like a hero.
In 1917, Capone was working at the Harvard Inn, a little speakeasy and dance hall on Coney Island, run by mobster Frankie Yale. After making several comments to a pretty young lady named Lena, who refused to go out with him, he made a comment he thought was a compliment. Lena didn't, and neither did her big brother, a hood named Frank Galluccio, who defended his sister by slashing Capone's left cheek and neck.
The cuts were so deep, Capone had at least 30 stitches. When the police arrived to question him, he said he was attacked by two men and didn't get a good look at them. He was unable to give a description.
The story goes like this. Capone invited 3 men to a dinner party. The men were beaten to death with a baseball bat.
This is one of those stories that has been repeated and embellished so many times that it's hard to find the actual truth. It's been shown in popular movies and TV shows in all kinds of ways, and parts are true. Capone did set up two of his best hitmen when he discovered they were trying to kill him for a reported $50,000 bounty put on him after the St. Valentine's Day massacre.
Albert Anselmi and John Scalisi were Capone's top hitmen at the time. They had joined forces with Joe Gunta, another Capone outfit member who was trying to overthrow Capone. But we don't know where the party was held or what really happened that night. Here's what we do know.
Newspaper reports said Anselmi and Scalisi were found in the back of a stolen car with the back seat removed. Another body was found about 40 feet away. All had been shot to death with numerous wounds to the head and chest, and the police believed they had been beaten with the stocks of the guns before they were shot. It was immediately assumed this was a revenge killing for the St. Valentine's Day shooting, which happened just 2 months before.
Police informants later confirmed that the men were attacked and killed, placed in a car, and driven to Hammond, Indiana. Gunta was taken out of the car and thrown a short way away, while the car was sprayed with bullets and pushed into a ditch. It and the 3 men were found May 8, 1929, and taken for autopsy and identification.
The coroner noted these were the most disfigured bodies he had ever seen. His report states all 3 men were shot multiple times with a .38 special. Some biographers and historians claim there were enough wounds from gunshots to prove all the broken bones the men had were caused by bullets, not beatings.
But others claim no evidence of the men being beaten exists, with any bruises present at the time of the autopsies coming from moving the men to their car and then the car going into the ditch when they dumped it.
So on this one, we have to call both myth and true.
The story goes like this. Capone had a hole in his septum, the cartilage that divides the nose into 2 nostrils, which proves he was a cocaine addict.
Capone had sinus trouble and postnasal drip from a very young age. It supposedly gained him nasty nicknames and a few fistfights as a kid, which may have made it worse. His sinus problems plagued him his whole life, and eventually he developed a hole in his septum, which was much more rare before people started piercing their noses.
Capone was never accused of drug use during his lifetime. He didn't even drink hard liquor regularly, testifying in court that an occasional beer or a drink at social occasions were the only things he imbibed in. All of Capone's prison records state he did not use drugs.
But suddenly, Scarface came out in 1983, during a decade famous for cocaine use, and all kinds of new theories came out. Authors suddenly claimed Capone was so hooked on coke he went through withdrawal in prison. There is no evidence this ever happened, and it is not noted in any prison records we have been able to uncover.
They also linked the hole in his septum to his supposed addiction. No contemporary physician, including the doctor that operated on Capone's septum and tonsils in 1929, mentioned drug use. And we know Capone had syphilis, a disease known to cause deterioration of the septum. But the legend continues to grow.
The story goes like this: Al Capone had a brother in law enforcement, and no one knew until 1951.
Gabriel Capone, a barber in Salerno, Italy, and his wife Teresa, a seamstress, had 9 children. Their first, James Vincenzo, was born in 1892 in Salerno. Al, who was somewhere in the middle of this big pack, would be born in 1899 after his parents had immigrated to Brooklyn, New York.
Nothing is known about James's life until he left home at the age of 16 and assumed the name James Hart, after his favorite movie star, William S. Hart, who always played heroes in his hugely popular westerns. James tried to pattern himself after Hart too, trying hard to lose his accent and big city ways to be a true hero.
He may have served in the army during World War I, but some sources say he was later kicked out of his local American Legion when his war records couldn't be produced. This could actually have happened because James had legally changed his name after the war to Richard James Hart, and no records existed under that name. By this time, Richard James Hart didn't want anyone to know he was a Capone.
Hart lived in Homer, Nebraska with his wife and 4 sons. He was, wait for it, a federal prohibition agent, raiding bootleggers and speakeasy owners like his little brother Al would become. He was good at his job and earned the nickname Two Gun Hart.
In 1926, he became a special agent for the Bureau of Indian Affairs and is credited with arresting at least 20 wanted killers and chasing down moonshiners and destroying sills and warehouses. He returned to his prohibition agent position in 1931 and then became a marshal and justice of the peace when prohibition was repealed.
When his brother Ralph was on trial for tax evasion in 1951, Hart testified at the trial and revealed his true identity as James Vincenzo Capone. The newspapers loved the story of Capone's upstanding missing brother, and all the work Richard James Hart had done to distance himself from his family vanished.
He died less than a year later from a heart attack back in Homer, Nebraska. Richard Two Gun Hart was just 60 years old.
The story goes like this. After being released from Alcatraz, Capone's brain was so rotted by syphilis, he was reduced to the intelligence of a child.
On November 16, 1939, Al Capone was released from prison after serving 7 years, 6 months, and 15 days. He had also paid all fines and back taxes. His years of untreated syphilis had resulted in paresis, including inflammation of the brain and progressive dementia and paralysis. Newspaper stories surrounding his release were filled with the news that Al had the mental ability of a 12-year-old child or worse.
Capone had deteriorated in prison to the point where he exhibited odd behavior, which his wife May used to petition for his release. There are stories of him sitting in his heated cell wearing winter clothing for no reason, and guards reported he would often not follow orders, but not because he was being defiant. It seemed he just couldn't understand.
After his release, he was immediately taken to Baltimore for treatment of his condition. He was treated by Dr. Joseph Moore after an initial examination by Moore, a Dr. Chapman, and Dr. Kenneth Phillips. who was Capone's personal physician in Florida. Moore wrote a letter to Phillips, summarizing their findings. In the letter dated January 15, 1941, Moore said Capone had a Binet Simon age of 7 years, which increased to 14 and a half years by the time he was released from Moore's care.
This test, published in 1905, was intended to identify children between 6 and 12 years old who required special education. It is not an IQ test, and Capone had an IQ of 95 when tested years earlier. Capone was described in Moore's letter as a hyperactive with grandiose ideas and a poor grasp of his situation. He was silly and childish, and he would never get back what he had lost to the disease.
His final years were spent at his Florida home, reportedly having conversations with imaginary visitors and old enemies long dead. On January 21, 1947, Capone suffered a stroke and became ill with pneumonia. The following day, he suffered a heart attack. Al Capone died January 25, 1947, and was buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery in Chicago. After his mother's death in 1952, he was moved to Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois, where the great Capone grave still stands.
We hope you enjoyed this video.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hey, here's another Dragon Den video you might like.
And if you like this video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button.
And you can hit the notification bell if you'd like to know when our videos come out.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.